Joseph Fitzgerald was born on 5 May 1828 in County Clare, Ireland, to James and Catherine Fitzgerald. I haven't been able to find any records that match what I know of Joseph, so everything about his life before his marriage to Ellen Burke in Wisconsin in 1855 is just educated guesses. I can only speculate where in County Clare he was born and raised, whether he had any siblings, what his father did, etc. I attempted to narrow it down by looking for his parents. There were loads of James Fitzgeralds living in County Clare in the 1840s, and I was hoping I could get a lucky break and eliminate all but one of them. Joseph's grandson wrote that he was raised about 10 miles from Limerick. If we draw an arc at 10 miles from Limerick, it intersects with 3 of the many James Fitzgeralds that I found in County Clare, including a couple named James and Catherine Fitzgerald in Cluny, and at least one James Fitzgerald, wife unknown, in Kilsylie Parish. Kilsylie Parish includes the village of Broadford, where Joseph's future wife was born, and that's where I believe Joseph was born as well. Joseph reported on the 1900 US Census that he immigrated to the United States in 1849 at the age of 21. That puts his departure from Ireland smack in the middle of the Great Hunger, which lasted from 1845 to 1852 and reduced Ireland's 8 million population by about a quarter, with over 1 million dying and another 1 million plus fleeing the island to North America and England. I can't document the Great Hunger in this video, and I have so much to say about how Joseph came to Wisconsin that I'll be rambling on for 10 minutes before I even get there. So I'll leave that for the video about his father-in-law, Richard Burke. Check out the card above for more. Quick summary, Joseph Fitzgerald fled Ireland in 1849 after surviving 3 major potato crop failures, as well as epidemics of typhus, relapsing fever, and dysentery. Joseph's grandson wrote more than a century later that, "My father told me that it took Joseph Fitzgerald 3 months to sail from Ireland to this country, and that the captain of the ship was drunk most of the time." If Joseph's transatlantic crossing really took 3 months, it would have been an extraordinarily long voyage. A typical voyage by sail from Liverpool to New York in the 1850s took about 40 days. 3 months was enough time for a clipper ship to sail from Liverpool all the way to Australia. Joseph's grandson wrote that he arrived in Boston, where he had some family. There are no matching records from Boston, and there should be. Boston's ship lists are complete from 1820 to 1890. The Steerage Act of 1819, the first real federal immigration law, while primarily intended to improve conditions for passengers, also mandated that any ship arriving in a U.S. port keep a record of each immigrant's name, age, gender, and occupation. Of course, Joseph still could have arrived in Boston. Cecil Woodham Smith wrote in The Great Hunger that Massachusetts forbid passengers to land until an official had examined them to discover if any had been paupers in another country or were lunatic, idiot, maimed, aged, or infirm persons. In addition, all passengers were required to pay $2 head money on landing. Failing any condition meant a return voyage. These measures were designed to keep out Irish Catholics, but both the examination and tax were easily avoided by landing in small coves on the coast of Massachusetts. Calvin Bailey, Boston superintendent of alien passengers, estimated that in 1845 alone, 17,000 people avoided the tax and examination, compared to 34,000 that arrived normally. Consider those numbers for a moment. In 1840, Boston had a population of 93,000 people. And in 1845, in just the first year of the Great Hunger, as many as 51,000 Irish immigrants may have passed through the city. Woodham Smith offered another route for Joseph's immigration that matches a fact related by his grandson, Charles Klein, in a 1908 book, History of Kane County, Illinois. Both Joseph and his future wife resided for a time in Buffalo, New York, on the shores of Lake Erie, and across the Niagara River from Canada. Woodham Smith wrote that, "The British government consistently made the passage to British North America cheaper than to United States ports, and, in addition, transported poor immigrants who declared their intention of settling in Canada free, in barges, up the St. Lawrence into the interior. Advantage was taken of the low fare to cross the Atlantic to Quebec in a British ship, and often the immigrant, by alleging that his intention was to settle in Canada, procured free transport up the St. Lawrence before making his entry into the United States by the simple method of walking across the border." Taking a look at the numbers, in 1843, before the Great Hunger, out of 20,892 immigrants to Quebec City, only 85 settled in eastern townships of Canada, and only 208 in Montreal. The other 20,000 plus ended up in the United States. Now, the British Crown wasn't keeping immigration records. From the Empire's perspective, a British subject moving from one part of the Empire to another, say from Ireland to Canada, was little different than moving from Cornwall to Coventry. In other words, I can't prove that Joseph Fitzgerald arrived in Canada rather than Boston. But by 1840, canals made the passage along the St. Lawrence River really easy, so our Joseph Fitzgerald could have followed the inland passage to Wisconsin via Buffalo. There were even guidebooks for immigrants documenting options. After landing at Quebec City, it was possible to purchase a 35-cent ticket, not including meals, for a 7-day-plus ferry voyage direct to Chicago. Joseph could easily have worked as a laborer until he could afford passage and meals to Buffalo, and then repeat that until he had the money to get from Buffalo to Manitowoc. And the tiny town of Cato, Wisconsin, is where we first encounter contemporary records of Joseph Fitzgerald, when the 27-year-old married 16-year-old Ellen Burke at St. Boniface Catholic Church in Manitowoc on 10 June 1855. The couple had at least 3 children together in Wisconsin: Jenny, born in 1857, Mary, born in 1858, and Margaret, born in 1863. Joseph's wife, Ellen, reported in both the 1900 and 1910 U.S. Census that she had 2 more children who had died young. It's not clear if they were born in Wisconsin or Illinois. Joseph and his family appeared in Manitowoc County in the 1860 census, where Joseph worked as a farm laborer. This was pretty typical for Irish famine refugees. Few had any skills beyond planting potatoes, let alone any real education. Their lives as Americans were at the economic fringes. It was their children that managed to achieve a degree of economic stability, and their grandchildren that achieved the American dream. Between 1863 and 1868, and probably in 1865, after a decade in Wisconsin, Joseph and Ellen moved 200 miles south to the village of Lodi in Illinois. The town was renamed Maple Park in 1880. Joseph must have saved enough from his 15-plus years as a laborer to purchase a property in the village. In 1870, the 42-year-old was the proprietor of a saloon on Main Street, and he reported he owned real estate worth $1,200. It's a pretty good outcome for a famine refugee. Joseph ran his saloon at least through 1880, when he was 52, and probably well into the 1890s after all 3 of his daughters married. Interestingly, his grandson, Charles Klein, didn't mention that Joseph ran a saloon. He related that Mr. Fitzgerald had followed farming and, after coming to Illinois, he looked after a small farm and engaged in raising cattle and loaning money. Perhaps Joseph was engaged in both farming and running a saloon, but I suspect that Charles Klein wasn't being entirely honest. The temperance movement in Illinois was exceptionally strong, and Charles was a U.S. district attorney. I suspect that Charles did not want to highlight the fact that his grandfather had run a saloon. Charles added that Joseph was actively interested in local politics, and was a member of the County Central Committee and held various town offices. By 1900, when Joseph was 72, he wasn't running a saloon anymore. He reported to the census taker that he was a landlord. I suspect his only tenant was his son James. On 4 April 1904, around 4 p.m. in the afternoon, Joseph Fitzgerald died of heart disease. Despite spending most of his adult life running a saloon, the person reporting his death, his son James, listed his profession as farming as well. Joseph Fitzgerald is buried in the cemetery at St. Mary's Church in Maple Park.